Hey, what's up, guys? Hello for Football Talk here. Continuing our series of these positional draft breakdowns, we're going to talk about the wide receiver position today. Make sure to check out all my other videos here and my detailed write-ups on my page helloswithfootballtalk.com. The link for that is down below in the description to go with my different social media handles. Give me a follow there to stay up to date with all my work. As far as this group of receivers go, once again, there's some tremendous talent at the top and depth throughout the class. My 20th wide receiver could be a day 2 pick in any other year, and it really depends on the flavor and scheme fit where some of these names may go. And as always, let's start with a few names that came really close to making the list. With Dwayne Askridge from Western Michigan, Amon-Ra St. Brown from USC, Tutu Atwell from Louisville, Nico Collins from Michigan, and Josh Palmer from Tennessee. There's so many other guys who deserve mention here, the 2 guys from Clemson, a bunch of small school guys. There's just not enough time to talk about all of them, so I want to be able to focus on these 5 names before I get into the list. First up, Askridge, a former high school track athlete, which really shows on the field, the way he can blow by safeties and routinely presents a vertical threat. A lot of suddenness and quick twitch to his game, but also has that home run ability to take a slant 80 yards to the house on any given play, attacks the ball at full extension, and then can really run away from anybody. However, while DBs rarely actually get his hands inside his chest because of how shifty he's off the line, the way he can dip away from contact, those more quick-footed guys that we will face in the league, who are technically advanced and can get inside his chest, will give him some trouble releasing his routes. And while PFF actually claims he only dropped 3 passes this past season, I saw as many alone in the Central Michigan game, all due to lack of focus on securing the catch before becoming a runner, and those drop issues were a problem early on in his career. But Askridge, an electric playmaker who can win vertically or after the catch. At 5'9", 190 pounds, he will have to operate more out of the slot, but just go back to the Senior Bowl, he was smoking Power 5 defensive backs there. Then we have St. Brown from USC, the brother of Equanimous St. Brown from the Green Bay Packers, and they have another brother playing at Stanford actually. So obviously tremendous genes coming from a famous athletic family. And really, since the first time I watched him, I just thought great instincts for a young player already, built a strong connection with both USC quarterbacks, real technician who shows the plan of the line and adjusts his routes to the defense, can switch up gears as a route runner and be deceptive that way. He excels at finding open space and is actively looking out to help his quarterback, especially on third downs, and he's slippery after the catch. However, he ran a 4.51 at his pro day, and I would have said that his mid to high 4.5s, so definitely not a burner who will win vertically, and only averaged 4 yards after the catch last season, but an excellent blocker who handled Notre Dame linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in 2019 very well. Strong, tough, and highly competitive player, but not necessarily a big play machine. Right on the other side, you have Tutu Atwell, who is certainly undersized at only 5'9", 165 pounds, but in terms of a pure deep threat, I don't think anybody in this class is more capable of just running by the entire defense than this guy. Operated mostly out of the slot for the Cardinals, and he has different ways of attacking vertically, where he really puts safeties on their heels. They put him a lot as the number 3 in trips, and on those deep crossing routes, he's really a problem to deal with, but also involved quite a bit in those speed sweeps and shallow crosses, where his speed to get to the sideline and then run away from everybody really stands out, while also being pretty shifty after the catch. Obviously, it is a concern at that size, will likely be the lightest player as soon as he enters the NFL. Like I said, almost exclusively working out of the slot, has not shown the ability to work through contact and was rarely faced with it. Won't try to provide anything as a blocker, and Louisville tried to hide him that way with all those different fakes and running off defenders. Kind of a one-trick pony, but it's a very good trick. So if you're looking for the guy that can just stretch the field and be a specialist for you, Atwell can definitely present that. And then with Nico Collins and Josh Palmer, 2 very similar players to me, both big bodies who have that extra gear to separate vertically, and they can win at the catch point with great adjustments to the ball and really attacking it at its highest point. Both physical at the break point, and then when the ball is in the air. Each of them had a really nice Senior Bowl where they showed off those skills, however not really presenting much after the catch. Palmer never over 500 receiving yards in a season, and Collins set out 2020, before which he didn't really show that ability to get a step behind the defense. But with that, let's get into the list, and at number 10 we have Tylan Wallace from Oklahoma State, 5'11", 195 pounds, a senior, a former 4-star recruit in 2017 who barely saw the field as a freshman, but then exploded onto the scene in year 2 with just under 1,500 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns, earning first-team All-American notice as a true sophomore, tore his ACL in 19, and then started last season out a bit slow, but over his last 19 games combined, still over 1,800 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns. Back in 2018, he quietly broke Des Bryant's Cowboy receiving records and really went off in the team's 2 biggest rivalry games against Texas and Oklahoma, catching 10 passes for 220 yards and a couple of scores each. And while he hasn't quite reached those heights again, he has always stepped up in the big games for them, it seems like. Might not be able to sink his hips quite like one of those shifty slot receivers, but very efficient as a route runner, using hesitation releases a lot of times and creating space underneath with it. Wallace really excelled on post routes, where depending on defensive alignment, he can either take those tight inside releases or create a lot of space by widening the corner initially and then break it underneath. He does a great job of attacking back towards the quarterback after pushing vertically, and he just excels downfield, which was illustrated by the fact that his passer rating when targeted with a rating of 110.7 on passes of 20 plus yards downfield, and you saw it at the Senior Bowl, where he moved around very well, winning the majority of reps with efficient route running and dependable hands. Wallace is fearless with going up and attacking the ball, making those 50-50 balls look like a very one-sided affair, outstanding ability to adjust the ball mid-air, and really plays like he's 6'5" or something. I was actually shocked when I first saw that he's not even 6 foot tall. Strong hand and good concentration with the defender on his back and just contesting, swiping through his hands. He had 43 contested catches over his past 3 years in college combined, and after he catches the ball, there's not really any pause, getting upfield immediately, not shying away from contact, running through awaiting defenders to cross the first down marker, or dragging defenders for a couple of extra yards. Wallace also shows a lot of physicality as a blocker, consistently getting his hands inside the frame of defensive backs, and routinely knocking them backwards. However, not really the sharpest cuts in the world to create separation, and oftentimes needs to take that extra step when trying to gear down. Doesn't offer a lot in terms of the variety of releases, and mostly wins through contact rather than actually having a step on his defender. The coaches at Oklahoma State didn't do him any favors by really putting it that far outside, oftentimes between the numbers and the sideline, but he took away even more space by the way he was widening his releases, and then there was just no window to throw the ball into unless he was going through contact. And while almost 100 yards per game is still pretty darn good, we have to acknowledge here that his numbers have decreased each of the last 3 years. So even though he doesn't quite measure in at 6 foot even, I valued Wallace as a big-bodied X-receiver because he just plays that way, and there's nothing that he lacks in that regard. The fact that his numbers decreased on an annual basis is somewhat concerning, but what I saw from him at the Senior Bowl, beating NFL corners every day, and I just think his skill set translates very well to the next level, even though he won't blow you away with the separation that he creates as a route runner necessarily. At number 9 we have Dyami Brown from North Carolina, 6'1", 195 pounds, a junior. A former top 200 overall recruit, Brown went from very limited production his first year on campus to cracking the 1,000-yard mark and double-digit touchdowns in 2019, where he averaged over 20 yards per grab, and then he actually slightly surpassed those numbers this last year in one last game and improved to first-team All-ACC. That North Carolina offense has a lot of explosive playmakers at those skill positions, but with Brown, he just has a different burst off the ball, and he gets off the line cleanly so often. You saw him blow by a lot of corners on the outside, especially on skinny post routes. When in cover 2, you saw the safety to that side look his way the whole time. And when the deep man played flat-footed, quarterback Sam Howell would punish the defense by putting the ball out in front for his top receiver routinely. Last season, he caught 12 passes of 20 plus yards for a total of 543 yards, and he led the Power 5 by over 4 yards with 15.4 yards average depth of reception since the start of 2019. However, he can also stop his momentum quickly and then re-accelerate as a route runner, and you see him working a lot of hop steps and hesitation maneuvers before kicking back into full gear. And with his speed to put corners on the heels with those vertical stems, he can do a lot of damage on deep in-breaking routes and rip off big plays in those, as well as the respect that he has to be given on hitch routes, where it's almost an automatic 5 yards, and then he's efficient at getting down the field and doubling that yardage. Plus, he's pretty physical at using that off-arm and pushing guys off himself. But with Brown, it's really all about that speed, has that extra gear once the ball is in the air, and even when he has to slow down a little bit, he keeps his corner stacked and makes some great catches through contact. Actually tied Oklahoma State's Tylan Wallace for the most contested catches among draft-eligible wide receivers over these last 2 years, with 21 of those. And also a problem on deep crossing routes, where if he can just catch it in stride and keep running, he can pretty much blow by anybody. With that being said, Brown's role with the Tar Heels certainly wasn't very complicated. Lined up on the outside on over 98% of the snaps, almost exclusively on the left side, where his route tree was very limited. Pretty much everything was built off the vertical prowess that he presents, but for that, not a very sturdy frame, and just not a lot of different ways that he can win. I thought he got neutralized for the most part by Syracuse's Ifeatumo Mfanwu last season, who had the size and the speed to carry him vertically down the field, and he didn't have any other aces up his sleeve. And if he's away from the action, Brown shows very little interest in getting involved as a blocker, or just kinda half-asses those runoff routes. Yet, I believe Brown has turned himself into much more than just a deep threat this past season. The route tree certainly has to be expanded, but in terms of work in the middle of the field, and just some of the details of the position, I think he's already shown plenty of growth, and still has a lot of room to go that way. You cannot teach speed, and with the right coaching staff, I think Brown could be high-level number 2 in my opinion. At number 8, we have Elijah Moore from Ole Miss, 5'9", 185 pounds, a junior. A guy who was just outside the top 200 overall recruits in 2018, recorded about 400 yards and a couple of touchdowns as a freshman, and then more than doubled his numbers the following season, before this year he completely exploded in Lane Kiffin's explosive offense, catching 86 passes for just under 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns in as many games, earning consensus All-American honors, really quick acceleration off the line and can bend off either foot. Just one of those guys who has that top tier quickness and speed, shows a ton of toughness going over the middle and taking some big hits from linebackers, with the concentration to hold onto the ball down the field as well, with a safety coming over as he catches the ball down the seams. Moore has a really good feel for selling against zone coverage and helping out his quarterback immensely with the way he continues to look for space and works back towards the passer, as well as adjusting his routes on the fly depending on the defensive coverage post-snap. Made a bunch of catches curling up down the seams as the safeties play too deep. He's an absolute master on double moves. With the way he commits his eyes and the hips, it's just beautiful to watch. And he can change up his footwork to support that. According to Pro Football Focus, Moore had a step or more of separation on 90% of his targets last season, which is the highest number of any receiver in his class. He was by far the most reliable player on his Ole Miss offense, has such natural sticky hands, and actually plays without gloves. Caught an absurd 86 of 101 targets this past season, with only 2 drops on those, and 10 on 200 catchable targets in his career. Made a lot of one-handed grabs behind his line of scrimmage, when a quarterback was just flipping it out there as the outlet receiver. And the Rebels quarterback heavily relied on number 8s on third downs and those big situations, because he knew where to come up with the play. Moore was the focal point of this Ole Miss offense, getting them involved on screens, jet sweeps, and just as a yard after catch specialist. With the ball in his hands, he's shifty, deceptive with those head fakes, and he has much better balance to stay on his feet and slip out of the grasp of tacklers than you would expect for his size. And while it won't be a huge part of his game, 11 contested catches at 5'9", that's pretty impressive. However, Moore is pretty much just a pure slot receiver at the next level, I believe. Had less than 150 career snaps out wide in college already, and only faced press on 38 snaps all of last season. Simply doesn't have the functional strength to be an asset as a blocker, and doesn't look overly interested in that area anyway. And a lot of his production came on manufactured touches, in a spread-oriented offense where he saw a lot of green grass ahead of him. But maybe above all, his future NFL team will have to make sure that he is mature enough to be a true professional. He had a really stupid moment at the end of the 2019 season against in-state rivals Mississippi State, where he did the Odell Beckham Jr. peeing dog impression in the end zone after scoring what would have been a game-time touchdown, but with the PAT being pushed back and missed in the process, they actually lost that contest because of him. Obviously, I can't speak on the maturity of the young man, even though that one act I can tell is dumb, but rather I'll evaluate what he does on the field. And while I do believe he's a pure star at the next level, in that role he can be a chain mover from day one. He can win underneath and down the field, he's tough, he has great hands, and he's shifty after the catch. I wouldn't be shocked if he led all rookies in receptions this upcoming season if he joins the right team. And we're gonna stick with the name Moore as we get to Rondale Moore from Purdue, Even smaller at 5'7", 180 pounds, a junior as well. One of the top recruits in the Ballmakers' recent history. This guy put his stamp on college football right away when he went for almost 1,500 scrimmage yards and 14 touchdowns his freshman season, earning consensus All-American honors. These last 2 years have kind of been marked by injury, as he appeared in just 7 total games and combined for 657 receiving yards while reaching the end zone only 3 times. But with crazy testing numbers at his pro day, he has kind of put his name back on the map. The one word that comes to mind when talking about Moore is juice. He obviously doesn't have the prototype measurements, but this little dynamite showed that he can produce big plays in all facets of the game. In his first game as a Boilermaker, he put up almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns from scrimmage, and overall he had 7 games of at least 100 yards as a freshman, including an incredible performance and an upset win over Ohio State. He can really freeze defenders with the way he comes off the ball, presenting that foot fire and then exploding either way. Moore can work in different speeds, change up his footwork on the fly, and be really sudden with the way he can get around defenders as a route runner. He's patient with setting up his routes, but then can explode out of his breaks, and at times you see him almost come to a complete stop, but then plant that foot in the ground and just create instant separation. Has the ankle flexibility to work deeper down the field and bend off either foot without having to throttle down. And while he only ran whip routes in that way, he could be a nightmare on double moves at the next level. That start-stop ability also really shines when he has the ball in his hands, super shifty in tight spaces, but then so elusive once he gets into the open field, where it looks like he's glazed with butter almost at times. Plus, at 180 pounds, his contact balance is pretty insane. The way he can spin or bounce off tackles, put the offense to the ground and regain his balance. So many situations where you feel like he's definitely going down, all wrapped up, and you almost want to skip to the next play, but somehow he finds a way to get out of it and just keep on running. He forced an FBS high 37 missed tackles and gained almost 900 yards after the catch, and over these last 2 years, he's broken another 47 tackles on 178 catches. There were a few double catches, but in the end, he had a 92% catch rate on catchable passes as a freshman, and didn't drop any balls last season. Plus, of course, he can win vertically, where he shows excellent concentration tracking the ball down the field, and he had to deal with a lot of bad balls, coming in at weird angles, and some have found a way to come down with the catches. The obvious question marks with Moore are his size and if he can stay healthy. As a freshman, we thought that he would dominate college football for the next 3 years, but he was battling hamstring injuries in year 2, and then was limited to 3 games this past season due to an undisclosed injury. So he started more as a gadget player and return specialist early on, and he hasn't been able to grow as a wide receiver necessarily. More than a third of his career receptions came on screens, and less than 20 actually came in the 10 to 19 yard area, so it's all quick touches or over the top stuff. And Moore came in 2 inches shorter even than we expected at his pro day, so his catch radius for an NFL pro is minimal, and he has already had some problems with passes thrown over his head, and while he can be an electric return specialist at the next level as well, he does get a little too cute at times, reversing the field and trying to always go for the big play instead of just taking what is there first. I don't think you can really take last season too seriously when evaluating Moore, because the offense was just force-feeding him the ball on touches behind the line of scrimmage, and he wasn't really allowed to open up and win vertically down the field. He was certainly more of a gadget player throughout his time at Purdue, but he has shown the ability to be a dynamic separator as a route runner and just brings a lot of juice to an offense with the ability to go the distance on any given play. Certainly not the most complete receiver, and he still has a lot of room to grow, but I believe he has superstar potential if he can just stay healthy. He just reminded us of how ridiculously explosive he is at his pro day when he ran sub 4.3 in the 40 and had a 42.5-inch vertical at 5'7". Let's move away from these smaller receivers a little bit and get to, I think, the biggest guy on this list, Terrace Marshall from LSU, 6'3", 200 pounds, another junior. We all know the history of receivers at LSU, and I don't have to make it a mystery here. Jamar Chase is going to show up later on, but this guy was actually ranked high as a recruit coming out. Was the third receiver on the Tigers offense in 2019, behind 2 All-Americans in Chase and Justin Jefferson, while still producing almost 700 yards and 13 touchdowns. This past season, as kind of the solo show, he went for over 700 yards and double-digit scores again, while playing in only 7 games before opting out for the rest of the year, as LSU didn't really have a chance to do anything anymore. Marshall has ideal size and great play strength for the wide receiver position. He actually went from playing 3/4 of the snaps out wide in 2019 to basically the same percentage in the slot, taking over that Justin Jefferson role. And while he isn't a finished product like Jefferson, he presents several tools and signs of technique as a route runner, eats up a lot of ground with those long strides, and does a nice job of getting onto the toes of defensive backs before bending off either foot and winning that way. Plus he has the large frame where defenders can't really reach around him. Marshall gets pretty physical with pushing off at the top of the route, and he really frees himself downfield with arm chops and those solid push-offs. At 6'3", he actually ran some whip routes where he didn't look uncomfortable dropping his weight, and there are a few double moves on tape where DBs actually land on their butt. And while I don't expect it necessarily at his size, he can win vertically, especially on post routes, where that big frame also helps him protect the ball from any swipes from defenders coming over. And passes of 10 plus yards down the field, he had a passer rating north of 150 when targeted, and LSU asked him to run a lot of guys off in order to create space underneath. To go along with that, Marshall presents a large catch radius and has that ability to win above the rim. Came up with 25 of 41 contested catch situations these last couple of years combined, and also down the field wins with light hands and quickly pulling the ball into his frame. He may not be super shifty, but he can make something work after the catch, where when he opens up, he can really run, and he kind of becomes a wild horse with the ball in his hands, fighting through contact and pulling his legs out the grasp of defenders. And what really impresses me about Marshall's production in 2020 is the fact that he was right on par with Justin Jefferson's per game production in that same role. Despite the level of quarterback dropping off dramatically and the offense scoring over 16 points less per contest, even if he was the only star receiver on that offense. With that being said, Marshall's frame and length can be tough to deal with for smaller defenders, and he can push around DBs purely based on strength at times, but he needs to learn how to do a better job in terms of breaking down in space and tends to stop his feet too much, as well as not really doing a good job of anticipating the movement of defenders depending on plays. He's pretty lethargic getting off the ball, and he ran a lot of flat routes and stuff like that for LSU, where he was basically jogging. Also, you see him at times kind of run himself into coverage. With 7 drops on 55 catchable passes last season, there's a lack of concentration and what we call taking a picture of the ball. On passes over the middle, he needs to do a better job of extending his hands back towards the quarterback rather than allowing defenders to come over the top and knock the ball down. And you can tell there's a little bit of awareness and being hesitant with putting his arms out, going over the middle altogether. And the ball security, once he has the catch secured, is a little worrisome as well, not really tucking it in properly as he tries to get around defenders. While Marshall obviously isn't on par with teammate Jamar Chase, there's a lot to like with this guy. He can win on all 3 levels, plays big off the line and when the ball is in the air, while already having shown a lot of improvement coming into 2020. There's some concerning things when it comes to ball handling, I would say, overall, but at his measurements, the jump ball ability will likely transfer very well, and he presents inside-out versatility. And that brings us to the top 5, where first we have Kadarius Toney from Florida, 5'11", 190 pounds, a senior. Actually just a 3-star recruit as a quarterback coming out of high school. It took Toney a while to transition to catching passes instead of throwing them, and he was fighting through some injuries early on in his career. Only caught 50 passes for just over 600 yards and 2 touchdowns through his first 3 years with the Gators, is more of a gadget play specialist. And then last season, he touched the ball 89 times for 1,145 yards and 11 touchdowns, plus he added another score on a punt return, turning himself into one of the most dangerous players in the SEC. When we talk about instant acceleration, that's what Toney brings. In terms of being at full speed after 2 or 3 steps, his explosiveness and quicks are really on a different level, but you also see him win vertically down the field from the slot against safeties, where he quickly puts them in a trail position, threatens off the line instantly and puts defenders on their heels, can make defenders look bad on jerk routes with the way he can drop his weight and re-accelerate off either foot, utilizes a lot of slide releases to be able to go either way, but just the way he snaps his head around violently when he comes out of his breaks, the way he can jump stop and then break either way, it's really special, and he has those Keenan Allen-like hop steps and almost dead legs as a really unique overall route runner. But the show really starts when Toney has the ball in his hands, where he can just kick it into another gear, and a lot of guys can break ankles. With this guy, I feel like he's tearing ACLs out there with the stuff he does in the open field. He was nicknamed the human joystick for a reason, because of how twitchy he is, the way he can drop his knees and ankles, come to a dead stop and then explode out of it again, Also has some pretty good contact balance for that size, being able to run through arms from defenders swiping at him. He has that dynamic burst to where he's running out route way short of the mark on 3rd and long, and he can just turn upfield and get the necessary yardage, but also dangerous going over the middle where he has the speed to get the opposite sideline, but can also foot fake defenders in the middle of the field. These last 2 years, he's broken 32 tackles on 80 combined catches, just very deceptive with head fakes, and the way he can set up defenders, which makes him tough to bring down on special teams as well. However, injuries have limited Tony to just over 500 snaps over his first 3 years at Florida, and it took him until this past season to actually produce at least 300 yards through the air, only has a 74.5-inch wingspan, and won't really give you a lot in those 50-50 ball situations. As much as people bang Alabama's Devontae Smith for his size, if we go by the school measurements, Tony played at only 2 pounds heavier, so there's definitely some concerns with that slim frame. We haven't really seen him out on the perimeter and dealing with press coverage. At this point, just not a super consistent or technically refined route runner either. But to me, this is the most slippery and weirdly flexible receiver in this class. The experience is limited, and we haven't seen him win from the outside a whole lot, but I think with the way he can avoid contact and that burst off the line, he can play some flanker, even though he'll primarily do his damage in between the hashes and vertically down the seams. Only 3 drop balls on 123 catchable passes in his career as well. I think he will be a weapon catching, running, and returning the ball, who you can manufacture touches for as he is growing as a route runner and all-around receiver. At number 4, we have Rashad Bateman from Minnesota, 6'1", 210 pounds, a junior, a top 500 overall recruit, quickly made a name for himself with the Gophers. As a freshman, he already went for just over 700 yards and 6 touchdowns, and as much recognition as Tyler Johnson got for his 2019 season, it was Bateman that really emerged as a big play threat for that Minnesota passing attack, finishing with over 1,300 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns on the season, while being named the first team All-Big Ten selection. And after initially intending to sit out the 2020 campaign, he did play in 5 games, almost averaging 100 yards per week, before opting out of a couple of games prematurely anyway. Bateman showcases easy acceleration off the line, and offered more of a vertical stretch for Minnesota than Tyler Johnson did during his steady career with the Gophers. I really like the way he uses hesitation releases before taking off down the sideline, does a good job overall of setting up defenders, with the way he may stem his route one way and then break underneath them. More elusive as a route runner than you expect for his size, and he really aids on deep in-breaking routes for Minnesota, where he kept those shoulders vertically before breaking inside, and then is a threat to cut across the field and go the distance. He also does a nice job of finding space after the initial route is dead, and he understands when to slow down, if there's a corner blitz and there's a safety capping over the top, or some type of late rotation where that window opens on the sideline in cover 2. And he has that gliding speed to win on post routes, especially when safeties are playing flat-footed in quarters coverage, and he can just run right by them, as well as having a couple of filthy post corner routes on tape. In 2019, he had an average depth of target of 16.7 yards, and he averaged more than 20 yards per grab. In addition to his smooth route running, Bateman has excellent body control and focus, while being an alpha with the ball in the air and having dependable hands overall. He has the long arms to reach over defenders' heads in jump ball situations, and he deals pretty well with passes thrown slightly behind him. Had a couple of crazy one-handed grabs in 2019 against Rutgers and South Dakota State. Bateman was heavily involved in the RPO game, where those skills of going over the middle and being a problem to bring down were on full display. He's a long strider, uses that off-arm very well to swat down the reach of tacklers trying to pull him down, has some wiggle in the open field, and can really pull his shoulders through contact as well. Over the course of his career, he's broken 36 tackles on 147 total catches, and while he wasn't asked to contribute much as a blocker, you see him run corners off with outside releases, and when he's near the point of attack, he's looking for work. On the flip side with Bateman, there's a little too much of a backstep before getting out of his stance for my taste, just operating out of that wide stance. But the biggest issue for him are those focus drops, taking his eyes off the ball too quickly and being caught off guard at times when the ball is put right on him as he gets out of his break. Overall, he dropped 19 passes on 166 catchable targets in his career. As a route runner, he tends to beat the drum and chop his feet too much when getting out on harder breaks, where he's working back to the quarterback, for example. And what I wanted to see from him in 2020 was the ability to not let corners challenge him as much off the line and be more active with his hands overall. But playing more in the slot that season, we didn't really get to see that. And while the circumstances weren't great, and he probably decided shortly before the season that he was actually going to play, he just looked a little heavy and not quite as dynamic as we were used to from him. That's how the Minnesota quarterback had a passer rating around 50 on passes of 10 plus yards going to his top receiver this last season. For me personally, Bateman has been wide receiver 4 all along. Looking at how fluid he is, that ability to track the ball, win at the catch point, and create big plays on catch and run opportunities. Even though he's only 21 years old, he has a lot of experience playing in the slot and out wide. So I think he can be an X or big slot from day one, and especially in an RPO heavy offensive attack, he could be the primary target at both those spots. So I could really see him going anywhere in the second half of the first round. But that moves us into the top 3. The 3 names really everybody's been discussing. And the first one here, for me, is Devontae Smith from Alabama, 6'1", 175 pounds, a senior, and not a top 10 receiver recruit nationally for the Crimson Tide. When you look at Smith's resume, it really stacks up with any receiver coming through that school. While his freshman season was rather quiet, he did end it with a bang, catching a game-winning touchdown in overtime of the 2017 National Championship game versus Georgia. And since then, his receiving yardage has increased all 4 seasons, leading the team in receiving yards and touchdowns each of the last 2 years. It was this past season when he blew everybody out of the water, setting new school records with receiving yards and touchdowns, as well as earning the Triple Crown for receivers nationally, with 1,856 yards and 24 touchdowns, becoming the first wide receiver to win the Heisman Trophy since Desmond Howard in 1991, and basically sweeping all the other awards that he was up for, before bookending his college career with another national title. Once Jalen Waddle went down with a broken ankle last season, Smith really started to put himself into a class of his own. Jerry Jeudy was my wide receiver 1 last year, and that's still probably given the advantage in that regard, but since he did most of his work in the slot, I would say that Smith is the most technically refined all-around receiver in a long time, just has such a great feel for setting up defenders, avoiding contact, and creating separation. Among all 4 receivers that will go in the first round these last 2 years combined for Alabama, he was not only the most productive one, but he actually played the most important spot at X, while having to slide inside more to replace the things that Waddle did for the Tide last season. He's amazing on stutter releases, and the way he gets defenders to stop their feet, without letting defenders properly read his hips a lot of times. Nicknamed the Slim Reaper, this guy is just so tough to really put hands on, and how slippery he is. Definitely has that extra gear to run by guys in vertical patterns, and over these last 2 years combined, he's hauled in 17 catches of 40 plus yards, which is tied for first in the nation, and he's a nightmare to cover on those deep curl routes because of the way he can get off the line more conservatively, then give that burst up the sideline, and be really violent with the way he drops his hips and comes back to the ball, and just the way he works back towards his quarterback in general, making those catches through contact when there's a defender that actually has a clear shot at the ball. Nobody quite does it the way that Smith does. Even Jerry Jeudy last year said that Smith had the best hands of the bunch, and he really catches pretty much everything thrown his way. The ability to judge the ball in flight and adjust to it appropriately is second to none, really compared to anybody we've seen in college football over these last 3 years. So many times embarrasses defenders at the catch point, where he plays like he's Megatron. Not necessarily the type of electric make-you-miss ability like a Jalen Waddle, for example, but really tough to bring down after the catch once he gets gliding down the field. With him, it's more about being deceptive with head fakes and giving defenders a little move without really having to slow down at all. Doesn't shy away from contact either, but on crossing routes, he ends up running way longer than expected a lot of times because he gives that little dip to the inside and then beats them around the edge anyway, or he cuts upfield when defenders pursue too hard. Smitty ran a lot of slants on the backside of RPO concept and ripped off many big plays on those, where even if the ball was slightly thrown behind him, he didn't lose any speed, which is something that you see constantly show up on tape. And he doesn't mind getting his hands dirty as a blocker either, puts in better work than a lot of receivers north of the 200-pound mark. With that being said, when you look at him at 6'1", 175 pounds, there's nothing that really stands out physically about Smith, not a lot of muscle on his frame, and his teammate Jalen Waddle is certainly more explosive in short areas. That slender frame is definitely a bit of a concern, and if you can't add a little bit to it, I just think the difference in physicality at the next level will be a problem for him, because once he gets drafted, he will be the smallest receiver in the NFL in terms of pound for inch. When you look at his production at Alabama, while it is highly impressive with what he did against SEC competition, a lot of it was due to Steve Sarkisian's scheme, getting him the ball in space off mesh concepts, feeding him screen passes, and creating a lot of one-on-ones down the field. You go back, Smith was really the only receiver to give LSU's sensational freshman corner Derek Stingley Jr. trouble when those two were matched up against each other in 2019, and while they weren't going one-on-one as much in 2020, he went for over 300 yards against the biggest rivals down in Baton Rouge in the revenge blowout win over the Tigers, where he made that iconic one-handed grab. The overall production and consistency are highly impressive. He had several explosion-like performances to go on top of it. So Smith can really win in all areas, and while the frame is the biggest talking point with him, I think there's room to add some muscle to it, and we've already seen him beat up on some of the top corners that we will have coming into the NFL these next few years. But my top receiver from Alabama is Jalen Waddle, 5'10", 185 pounds, a junior, a top 50 overall recruit in 2018. Waddle was the SEC's Freshman of the Year, thanks to 848 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. The offensive numbers dropped a little bit his sophomore season, just because of how loaded that Alabama receiving room was, but he scored a couple of long touchdowns on punt and kick returns each, and this past season, he was on an absurd rate, which would have actually had him end up with better numbers than Devontae Smith if you project him over a full season, when he was up to 557 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air after 4 games alone, and then actually came back for the national title game, even though he clearly wasn't close to 100%. In terms of explosiveness, Waddle is really in a tier of his own as receiver class. As great as it may be, he has a ridiculous ability to accelerate and decelerate, which leads to defensive backs routinely not being able to get out of that transition before Waddle already has his eyes back on the quarterback. He's such a dynamic separator on those deeper developing routes, being able to bend off either foot without really having to throttle down at all, quickly eats up cushions to safeties and really puts them in a bind by being able to threaten to the post or corner, and I just love the way he attacks leverages and forces defensive backs to open up their hips in order to beat them out of the break. It seems like he's actually accelerating through his cuts, and if there were ever any questions about his long speed, just check out that 90-yard touchdown he had against Georgia last year, where he put a warp motor felt like. And when you look at the numbers, his passer rating when targeted last season actually increased by depth. He was over 100 on all 3 levels, and he had a perfect one on passes of 20 plus yards down the field. There was this one play against Texas A&M last year, where he initially showed a deeper break to the inside, but then quickly cut back upfield against a 2-man defense, and he ended up actually having to slow down for a deep ball, but still was about 5 yards behind the safety and corner. Waddle was Alabama's run catch specialist, who they give the ball to on screens and quick passes to go with several speed sweeps. The amount of time he was getting the ball going out to the sideline, and the defender was perfectly leveraged, but he gives a little dip to the inside and then beats him around the corner anyway. It was just absurd. There are times when he catches the ball underneath, and it's like he presses some kind of boost button on a controller for an automatic 10 or 15 yards. He's nearly impossible to bring down one-on-one in space, and makes those ankle-breaking type cuts across the grain routinely. Because of that, he was used a lot on eye candy, orbit motions, fake sweeps, all that kind of stuff. And while he might not posterize guys like his teammate Devontae Smith, he shows great concentration to hold on to catches downfield, tracking the ball over either shoulder, with a defender on his back, or the safety delivering a big hit as he's mid-air. And while he will bring more value as deception in the run game, he does a good job of putting his body in position as a blocker, and offers tremendous value as a return man. However, when you look at Waddle, he simply doesn't have a ton of experience, with just under 1,000 career snaps and having run about half as many routes. I don't think he should be pigeonholed as a pure slot receiver, but he spent just over 100 snaps on the outside these last 2 years combined, and at 5'10", he won't offer a lot in contested catch situations. Also could use a little more polish in the intermediate area, having run a lot of underneath stuff or being targeted down the field. And of course, he's coming off a fractured ankle and has had a few nicks and bruises throughout his college career. When I watched any tape on a player on Alabama's offense or the defense facing them, I just could not help myself but look at Waddle instead at times. He's the most electric playmaker that I've scouted at the wide receiver position, and he's turned himself into a much better all-around receiver during his time in Tuscaloosa. Easily a top 10 overall prospect on my board, and I don't think there's a lot of separation between numbers 1 and 2. They just offer different skill sets. But let's get to number 1, and that's Jamar Chase from LSU, 6 foot, 210 pounds, a redshirt sophomore, A former top 100 overall recruit in 2018, Chase didn't get a lot of work as a freshman with just over 300 receiving yards, but then in 2019, he turned himself into the best receiver in all of college football. As just a true sophomore, he recorded almost 1,800 receiving yards and 20 touchdowns through the air on 21.2 yards per catch. That won him the Biletnikoff Award and made him an unanimous All-American on the way to LSU's national championship, outshining the top rookie receiver in the NFL last year in Justin Jefferson. And as crazy as it may sound, with all the talent that was available, I think Chase would have also been the top receiver in the 2020 draft already, and there's nothing about the tape that has changed since then to make him drop here at all. He's a threat catching the ball underneath off those RPOs, with the things he can do after the catch, as well as going over the top on any given play. The way he hesitates and slides his feet, making him a tough match off the line, and he uses those double hand swipes to get the hands of corners off himself, the way he has a step on that guy just a couple of yards past the line of scrimmage. He utilizes a lot of split releases to be able to go either way effectively, and what really stands out about him as a route runner is the way he may come off the ball versus off coverage at just about 80% at times, and then really blow by his man by hitting another switch. Shows good explosion and ability to bend off either foot, and while he may not be super refined with different hand combats, Chase can stab at defensive backs with that near hand and reduce the shoulder to not get hung up with contact. Already has a pretty good feel for drifting around and settling in space, finding those cover 2 holes. But even more so, Chase can really sit down in the chair to get out of his breaks, while already being tremendous at selling double moves with different speeds and his eyes. And when you look at the production in 2019, it's pretty crazy to think that he only caught 5 screen passes. When the ball is in the air, Chase perfectly frames it with his hands, and he's just so natural in the process to where you could see Joe Burrow put the ball right on him just as he got out of his breaks. The ball tracking and the way he puts his body in between the defender and the ball are just outstanding, shows incredible concentration down the field, and even when you think he's turning out of room, he still somehow finds a way to get his feet in bounds. When you watch him on jump balls, you almost can't believe that he's only 6 feet tall, with the way he can elevate and kind of hang in the air like a basketball player. You saw it a lot on purposefully underthrown balls and those back shoulders from Burrow, where it seemed almost automatic, and how easy it was getting his body in position. Only Devontae Smith and North Carolina's Dyami Brown have more 20-plus yard receptions versus single coverage since the start of the 2019 season, and Chase didn't even play in 2020. And he would have had 10 more deep catches at 24 than any other returning receiver this past year. Chase plays the game with an attitude, which you can see after the catch as well, where he gets around defenders quickly, slips off defensive backs trying to wrap him up, and just gets upfield right away. And then when he's on the run, he's just not going to be stopped, dipping away from pursuit defenders, using the off arm to push guys off, and just beating everybody across the field with his speed. Overall, he broke 22 tackles on 84 catches in 2019. When you're looking for negatives, you kind of have to be nitpicky here. I don't think Chase has quite the dynamic explosiveness as my number 2 in Jalen Waddle, for example, and his measurements aren't elite. We'll have to see if that dominance at the catch point really translates to the next level, because he is only 6 foot tall, and most importantly, he certainly benefited from playing in the most explosive passing attack we have seen in a while to go along with Alabama in 2020, when he caught passes from Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow, who was smashing records everywhere he looked, and received a lot of beautifully placed balls, which kind of threw him open, to where it was those ball skills that were on full display, rather than running away from defenders all the time. With that being said, we have to consider Chase was only 19 years old when we last saw him, and he was roasting eventual NFL players. We've seen him step up in the biggest moments, like in the national championship game against Clemson, when he had 9 catches for 220 yards and 2 scores, looking like the best receiver out there when there was so much talent on the field. He just ran sub 4.4 and had a 41-inch vertical to cement his wide receiver 1 status even more at his pro day. And while he has all-pro potential on the outside, he was also super productive working out of the slot. So while it wasn't limited capacity, I think he could also be a nightmare on the inside. And that wraps up the list. Here's a quick look at it again. Like I said, Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle, not a huge difference. Both I think top 6 prospects for me right now. Devontae Smith, not a huge difference, but doesn't quite have those physical tools. And then you have Bateman, Tony, Marshall, all worth late first round picks in my opinion. The 2 Moores and Dyami Brown, also in the top 50 range. And Talon Wallace, I think I'm a little higher than most people out there. But like I said, just such a deep class. There will be starters drafted on day 3, trust me. But with that being said, let's finish up. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends that like to follow the draft and NFL coverage overall. Make sure to follow all my social media channels to stay up to date whenever I post something, as well as go to my other posts and videos. You will find all the links you need down in the description. I'll be back next week talking about the top safety prospects, and then we move on to the quarterbacks before I post my big board and my one and only mock draft of the year, where I actually explain every pick in detail. So until then, see you later. Peace!